Our guest speaker today is Ibrahim Moustafa. Why don't you come on up? Now, while you're doing that, I'm going to get my cell phone out. I want to make sure that I'm doing okay on Wordle. Just kidding. I don't have Wordle on here. I took all the games off my phone because they were too distracting for me. No, I get my phone out because I put a 30-minute timer on here.
Okay.
And guys, I'm really going to try to honor it this time, okay?
I'm going to blow it out the window, so don't worry about it.
So, first of all, thank you so much for being willing to come and be with us today. I know you're very busy, got a lot going on. You have your hands in so many different pies? I need a better analogy. That's a weird one. You have a lot of stuff going on. I'll just say that. I like to start these conversations off by asking our guest how they would want to introduce themselves. Because we can always pull up the bio and read that,
yeah.
But that might not be how you would like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, first I want to say thank you to Giuseppe for having me, and thank you all for having me this morning. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, I'm a comic book, graphic novel writer and artist. I grew up in Beaverton. Shout out to Travis. I used to work with him 20 years ago. It was a nice surprise to see him this morning when I walked in. And I live out here in Southeast now with my wife and our dog. And yeah, I spend every day trying to be a little bit better than I was the day before in all aspects, and especially at my job. So,
all right. So you're a local. Born and raised?
Born in Seattle, but I moved down to Oregon when I was like 6 or 7. So okay. I kind of feel like I learned cursive here, so that's kind of where,
What is this cursive of which you speak?
So cursive is a way of writing in which.
But a lifelong Pacific Northwest.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Most of us know about superheroes. We've heard of these comic books.
Right.
But it is a medium that is not as popular today as it was 30 years ago.
Right.
I think of this as a storytelling medium at its core. Mm-hmm. How do you picture, like, what do you think of a comic book and a graphic novel as? Like, how would you explain that to somebody who has never encountered a comic book or a graphic novel? They've never seen it in their library. They've never opened one up.
Yeah, it's almost like watching a movie with still frames instead of moving pictures. And there are dialogue boxes, which will often be narration or characters' inner thoughts, and then there are word balloons with the words that they're speaking. And so all those things kind of coalesce into kind of a fluid storytelling apparatus, I guess, is the way I describe it. I really love what comics can do because there are things within like the comic book pages you just can't do anywhere else, right? There's a juxtaposition of words and images that is like really just native to the comic book format. And prose can describe something to you in a lot of detail, but comics is more about showing rather than telling. So you might have a whole page worth of description captured in 1 or 2 panels on a comic book page. And it really allows you as the reader to participate in taking in which aspects of that visual you want. Whereas if it's like prose, they're describing, what the sunset looks like. It's brush strokes from a vivid palette and, or something like that. That's the author giving you their version of it. But when you are looking at the image, you're taking it in and kind of deciding and participating in what you want it to tell you. So it's a very interactive storytelling medium in that way.
Well, and there's often 2 different aspects that people really focus on. For somebody like me, I'm often drawn to who the writer is and who the illustrator is. Mm-hmm. Not that those are the only aspects involved in creating a comic book. You also have the person who puts the text in there in the right fonts, mm-hmm. and That's an art form, and the colorist, and all of that.
Right.
But the two big draws are often the illustrator and the writer.
Right.
And you do both for your creator-owned works. These are like different disciplines.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, it's funny because I started as an artist. I really bought into this kind of idea that there was this binary of a writer and an artist. And in comics, for some reason, even though it's a visual medium, writers often get most of the credit. And I've always likened it to sort of like being the stay-at-home parent as the artist, and you're feeding the baby and it's barfing on you, and you're cleaning the house and all this stuff, and then like the working parent comes home and then they get interviewed about what it's like to be a parent, and you're like, I'm the one covered in spit up. What are we, I kind of got tired of that, and I was like, what I do is storytelling. I don't see why like I can't just also write it. And then, I also had an editor at one point who gave me the opportunity to pitch a story that I would both write and draw. And when he said, you want to pitch something to me? I said, oh yeah, so should I like find a writer to work with? And he's like, no, you're a storyteller. Like, pitch me something. And that really was the thing that kind of unlocked into my brain of like, I guess I could. Like, I don't need to find somebody who's going to, make me wait forever on a script page and then write something that actually doesn't really translate visually. So like, doing it myself really allows me to kind of like, put on my best outfit for a job interview or something. It's kind of like when you're drawing from somebody else's script, it's almost like they're picking out clothes from your closet for you, and you're like, I wouldn't wear that shirt with those pants or something, I feel stupid in this, and because sometimes they'll write something and you're just like, I don't want to draw that.
Yeah.
It's two people sitting there talking in a hallway. There's nothing interesting about this to me, so it was a way for me to kind of go, okay, how can I make this something I'm excited to spend 12 hours a day drawing? Because that's ultimately how long it usually takes to do a single comic book page every day. So,
well, speaking of, could we show an example of a single comic book page? Thank you. So this is Sin. Is that the right way, or should I pronounce it Kind?
No, Sin.
Sin. Okay. I think I remember reading, I've not read this myself, but I'm sure it's great. It is a space western, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that
it takes place in, this is actually a kind of a loose sequel to a book I did called Count, which is my sci-fi reimagining of the Count of Monte Cristo, right?
I'm 2/3 through that right now.
Okay. Well, so spoiler alert. There's a sequel.
I recently met Sid. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I have a feeling they're going to make it.
Well, you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. So this book takes place in that same world. So it's not like a space thing necessarily, but it is sort of like another non-Earth world, right? So it's kind of a fantasy, kind of sci-fi vibe to it. And then essentially this story follows this character. She was, in the first book, she is like a government enforcer, basically. She was turned into like a cybernetic kind of Terminator type against her will. And so she was programmed to just be like an instrument of violence for the state, essentially. And this book follows her as she's trying to shed that past and like lead a better life. And so it kind of takes place in a dusty corner of that world where nobody knows who she is, and she's just trying to rebuild. But, as it happens sometimes, violence follows people, and so she has to kind of decide who she's going to be. And that's actually what that quote is from, that opened this, is her trying to get rid of that past and be somebody different. So,
Could we go down a little bit? It's a little hard to see. Oh man, because okay.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
One of the things I love about your illustrative style, you're good at like world building, and putting us in this place. That is, I picture that in my mind. It has movement. It has lights. It's got its own physics. Everything's reacting to it. But you're also really good at doing the individual characters and showing their emotions.
Thank you.
Like, even if we don't read these words, we're picking up on the dynamic here in this scene. You know, this is not a pleasant interaction.
Right.
You know, something else I appreciate is you do use violence. You're aware that violence has a role in storytelling, but at least in Count and some of the other things I've looked at from yours, the violence serves a purpose, and it's not necessarily like gratuitous.
Right.
You know, I know you've got a book coming out, Half-Blood, that is like a Japanese feudal colonial era horror book.
Yeah.
I'm doing a terrible job of pitching it, but I'm very interested in it.
Thank you.
I don't know how it's going to work with vampires involved. Maybe this is like the Blade movie where I'll be like, Brio, you cannot watch this.
It's because they're vampires, like you can kind of do whatever you want in terms of slicing them up. So it's a little bit more. That one is more of a mature reader book. But yeah, that one's essentially about a samurai who is half Sudanese, right? And it's sort of based on a real life guy named Yasuke, who was like a Sudanese former slave who came over to Japan with like a Catholic entourage. And
I saw his statue when I lived in Japan.
Okay, yeah. So he was, and essentially, like, I think a shogun or somebody was so taken by this tall, dark-skinned man that he was like, "You're coming with me, dude." And they ended up, he made him like a samurai, like retainer. So in this story, this guy is like, his father was a Sudanese deckhand on a Dutch trade ship, because for 200 years in Japan, the borders were closed. And so the only people who could come in were like Dutch trade ships. And so his father was from one of those ships. His mother was a Japanese woman. So he was this, mixed race, like outcast, and they called him Half-Blood, right?
Yeah.
So he sort of turned it into a moniker of like something to fear, and he became this very fierce samurai warrior. So we meet him at the very end of the samurai era, where there's just like no work. That way of life is becoming extinct. And a woman from London comes over. She's like a world explorer, anthropologist, and she's looking for a champion, basically, because her family was murdered by something, we don't know what. Vampires. And so she takes him back to London with her. So it's Victorian London, a samurai sort of fish out of water story.
Yeah.
And they're also paired with a Sikh warrior from India, who is like equally cool as far as like warrior status to the samurai.
In the preview shots, I see him as like a Han Solo type.
Yeah.
He's got like this charm and swagger to him, which I don't think we see enough of when it comes to Sikh or Central Asian people in general.
Yeah, and it's my favorite thing about making that book was the word samurai means to serve, and it was all about kind of a life of service, right? And more so to your lords, but the Sikh religion is about service to your community and service to God and other people.
Right.
So the two of them connect on this like shared, value. But Senjuro, the samurai, learns from seeing the Sikh character sort of like where that service should be placed, and to shed his ego and not worry about what other people think about you, and just be. And so there's some heart to it aside from just like carving up monsters. So
yeah. So some of us in this room might be like, oh man, the last thing I want to hear and talk about is like monsters or fantasy or sci-fi. But every week when we come together, we're usually connecting over story. Mm-hmm. We're talking often about story from our sacred text, stories that come from Scripture, stories that carry a lot of weight, especially in the Western imagination. And stories that we see used in so many different ways, sometimes as a bludgeon, sometimes as an encouragement, sometimes being used by two opposed groups of people. And I think when we talk about the Bible, we see like, yeah, people are shaped by stories. I'm shaped by the stories of Scripture and my understanding of them. I'm also shaped by other stories too, you know. Spider-Man has shaped me.
Yeah.
X-Men have shaped me. And I bet if we were to go around the room, we could talk about stories that have shaped other people. The story of my grandpa Gennaro and my grandma Ellen coming over to the U.S. has had a hand in shaping me. The stories that I make up about myself continue to take on a life and, you know, evolve and form. And so I want to talk a moment about why stories matter and what role they've had in your life in shaping who you are. And perhaps like what kind of life you see the stories that you make take on.
Yeah, I've always been somebody, I think, who learns through osmosis, you know, and a big part of that is like allegory. When something is put into terms that I can relate to and that I have an interest in, and, you know, sparks that dopamine hit in my brain, right? Of like, oh, I get this, you know. And for me as a kid, I was raised Muslim, and you know, there were stories within that and I just had too many questions about it, right? And with Superman, I was like locked in. I mean, it was like, oh, and I knew that I didn't have to believe it wholesale because it was a story, you know? Yeah. And so that I think I really locked onto, and it always kind of, Superman has always sort of been my North Star in terms of like, oh, that's how you treat people. And you try to do the right thing because you just should, if you can, you know? And
what if seeing the beauty in people is the real punk rock?
Exactly, right?
Steph, I used the line. She was like, you should not incorporate that into a sermon. So I'm using it now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, case in point, you know, Superman, a lot of times people don't like Superman because he's always too corny, he's too good, he always does the right thing, which I don't know when that became corny, but, you know. But a lot of people say, oh, he rescues cats from trees, right? One day I'm walking my dog and I hear like a scream, and I was like, what is that? And it turns out it was a kitten 75 feet up in a Doug fir in my neighbor's yard. Yeah, and like, how do you get a kitten out of a tree?
Yeah.
I spent 2 hours on the phone trying to figure that out. And, you know, eventually I found this really great guy who is an arborist for the city of Portland. Yeah, he has an Instagram account, 503 cat in a tree. So if you ever find a cat in a tree, that's how you, and he was communicating. This was 2 hours of being on the phone. He's the last person I spoke to, and he was like, yeah, I get off work at 3, I'll be there. He came all the way from Delta Park to Gresham, where I live, and threw a line up, shimmied up that tree, got that cat, and then now my sister has the cat, and I get to see him whenever I want, and he's living his best life, right? Yeah. And it's like, so many people walked by that tree and heard that cat and did nothing about it. There's a police officer who just parks, and I call him Officer Rod Sitswell, retired on duty. I went to his car and I was like, hey, you know, I'm trying to get like non-emergency fire department. He's like, oh, they won't send anybody. And I was like, do you know there's a cat? He's like, I'm aware. Like, okay, well, I guess you don't want the greatest PR win of your career by officer rescues cat from tree, right? So my point, and not to self-aggrandize, but just I think because of Superman, like it was a no-brainer for me that like there's a cat in a tree, you rescue it, you know?
Yeah.
So that to me is how stories are important, for things like that, especially when there's like a one-to-one and you go, I can do that. Like that's within my power to try to do something about it, you know? So I think that's how stories are so important. And then also, you know, my wife is a nurse, right? And COVID was very difficult for healthcare workers.
Yeah.
And for everybody, but healthcare workers in particular. And sometimes I sit there and I go, I should have done something different with my life. Like I'm just, you know, I'm drawing pictures. Like who cares? It's stupid. It doesn't matter, you know? And then during COVID, she would come home and she would read a book, or she would watch TV, or she would read a graphic novel. And I realized that, like, oh, those serve a function too, because people need escapism and they need to feel senses of hope and inspiration. And we get that through stories, you know? So that made me feel a little less guilty about not doing something better with my life. But yeah, I think that's important, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, so when I think of the role that like the Stanleys and the Jack Kirbys have had in the world, I think of a overall positive impact on the world. And so much of what they were doing was a reflection of their lived reality in a fantastical way.
Yeah.
And there's something, I think, about the fantastical, the suspension of disbelief that, at least for me, sparks hope.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes it's a thought experiment. You know, often the things we're reading are thought experiments, and it's afterwards that we're doing the, like, what would I do in that, you know? If I had spider powers,
right,
how would I use, you know? I talked to Brio about, like, we're reading X-Men, and, you know, what would you do if you could walk through walls, you know? Well, I'd like to think I'd be like Kitty Pryde and help people out. Maybe I'd want to do other things, but that's what I would like to think I would do. You know, but we have other abilities. We have other things we do. So, you know, that classic line, with great power comes great responsibility. When you're a kid, I think it's easy to think, like, oh man, what would I do with great power?
Mm-hmm.
When you get older, you're like, actually, I've got more power than I thought. Like, I can actually do something. I can't jump, you know, over a car. But I do have some ability in this world. And so I also have some responsibility. There's another aspect of stories that I think really are needed, and that's around representation.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit about this a few months ago, but a lot of us are used to, like, seeing ourselves in the story, and it's not very hard for us to be like, to do this one-on-one. You know,
right.
This is basically me, or I could see myself here. I come with a lot of privilege in this world, and yet when I was a kid and a young adult, every time I saw somebody with, like, an Italian name, like an Italian American on screen, there's a part of me that'd be like, oh, okay,
right.
You know,
yeah.
Oh, look at that guy. I guess I could be in movies if I wanted to. I don't, but I could. You know, I loved the '60s Zorro TV show, and my mind did not commute like, hey, the guy playing Don Diego is not Mexican and he's not Spanish.
Right.
My mind was like, he's Italian American, and he's like my grandpa's age, you know, and that meant something to me.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned the Sikh character in Half-Blood, and you mentioned a biracial individual as like the main character.
Mm-hmm.
How important to you is, like, having different people represented in the works that you do?
That's huge for me. I pretty much put it into everything I do, not in like a shoehorn kind of way, but just because that's the world we live in, and it's actually underrepresented in media, you know, in general. And you know, growing up, I mean, like, so my father's Egyptian, my mom is a white American. So I was always kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out of these two different cultures, and you know, my dad left when I was young, so that part of our culture left with him, but I still had the name and the religion and, you know, the stuff that made me different. So, you know, while I too enjoy a lot of privilege just being like a cis man in America, right? Like, there is also the aspect of like having a name that's very Middle Eastern and also very Muslim coded, and that has limited my career opportunities quite a bit. And, you know, I just want to do my part to kind of normalize it And so that is why I do that with my characters in the books. It's just kind of like, because I do recognize that a lot of times when you sell a book like this to a publisher, they're looking at it as an opportunity to make a movie or a TV show, because that's kind of what they're really trying to do these days. It's not even really about the books. It is for us, for who make them, but for the most part, the publisher's going, I bet this has a hook that would work in Hollywood, right? So I've done my part to try to, okay, well, if you want to make a movie or a TV show out of this, there's your main character right there, and they're, dark-skinned, or they're this or whatever. And I just try to, with the whole cast too,
That makes it hard for them to omit that character or change them.
Yes, especially when it's, there are cultural touchstone aspects of who that person is. Because you could just make it, sort of a generic main character that's interchangeable. But I think that also doesn't make for a very interesting story, because usually that's what we connect to, right? Is like the people in them. So I think
we have so many generic main characters that like what's their personality? They do the right thing. They're not even corny like Superman. They're just do the right thing.
Yeah,
they're Ethan Hawke, who's become more complex, but was James Bond starting off.
Yeah, Ethan Hunt.
Ethan Hunt, not Ethan Hawke.
Hawke.
Ethan Hawke's an actor.
Story character actor, Academy Award.
I'm sorry. You're a very interesting person. Saying this like he's
He's gonna hear about this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, I think people have kind of learned to sort of crave that though too, like a more complex kind of thing, because look, I'm a child of the late 80s, early 90s. I love action movies with Van Damme and Steven Seagal and all that, right? Yeah. But like, there's not. It's mostly just about like chopping people in the neck, and like I think now we're getting stuff that it has a little bit more nuance and layers to it, and that I think just makes it for a better story anyway. So
I agree. But that does bring up another point, something that people criticize in this moment. Mm-hmm. You brought up like non-white cisgender men and women are like, no wait, let me try this again. Non-white cisgender or transgender, non-binary women and men are in the minority of stories. Like, they're underrepresented still. And yet when we have films featuring and stories featuring somebody who's not a cisgender white man, you have people cry woke. They cry like, oh, this is just a cash grab for diversity, or this is just virtue signaling. For them, for some reason, they want it to remain white cisgender man does action or whatever. How much pushback do you get?
Thankfully, the stuff that I've been doing is with a publisher who's just kind of down for what I want to do, and they don't really ever...
Is that Humanoids?
Humanoids, yes.
Humanoids, okay.
Humanoids is a French publishing company that started a U.S. branch probably 25, 30 years ago. Humanoids was founded by a guy named Jean Giraud, who went by the pen name Mobius, and he is pretty much single-handedly the godfather of every modern sci-fi thing. Like, George Lucas read Mobius stuff, and that's a lot of his stuff went into Star Wars. And so, so they're known for kind of cutting-edge sci-fi and work that's kind of challenges the norms and stuff. So, thankfully, I found a home there, and they were very quick to embrace what I wanted to do. So I never got any pushback about anything. But yeah, you do get people who are like, woke or whatever. And I think anytime somebody's used to kind of having like the whole cake, if you try to carve a slice out for anybody else, they're like, that's my cake. And I think we're kind of like dealing with that, but I think that is that's now becoming the minority, thankfully. I hope, at least. It seems like that, where the people who get the most mad about that happen to be the loudest, but they're also a smaller group. And most people kind of just don't care. Like, it's kind of like, I just want to see a good movie or read a good book, So I'm very grateful to that becoming more the norm. And I think just by trying to put out stuff like I'm doing and not I don't virtue signal really in this. I mean, it's definitely like there are virtues in the stories, but I try to make it like a natural fit. I don't try to come out and hit people over the head with any of the messaging of the books.
Well, we talked a few months ago about virtue signaling and how we all do it.
Yeah.
It's just one group that's very loud about like, no, you're virtue signaling, and what we're doing is just proclaiming the truth. But you're declaring a virtue still. I think the problem we end up having is, I guess, in storytelling where it doesn't feel genuine, and with people where it feels duplicitous in some way or like chasing a trend.
Well, unfortunately too, especially in comics, we've seen a lot of people who wrote things that seemed like they were virtuous.
Yes.
And then years later, they're kind of outing themselves as like bigots and bad people. So it's like.
Yeah. Well, we see that with, so Harry Potter still immensely popular.
Right.
And at times, folks have been like, hey, Rowling, I really drew so much hope from your characters, and I saw myself in this, and for, 20 years? Rowling was like, yeah, Dumbledore has always been gay to me.
Right.
That's important to me. And then, you find out, well, I don't care about transgender females. They're not real to me.
Right.
And that's where it's like, okay, well, but you were a voice for inclusion, and you're a voice for my childhood. You helped shape me, and there's a feel of like betrayal.
Yeah, it's interesting when that like openness and virtue stops. Like it hasn't like a certain point where it's like it does not go beyond this line.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too because we're talking about virtue signaling like it's a bad thing, but like virtues I think are inherently a good thing, and signaling those Superman virtue signals, right?
Absolutely.
Like, and to be woke is like to be awake to what's going on, right? It's
Who
like,
wants
would you rather
that?
be asleep?
Yeah.
Like I don't, So it's funny how,
and I love how people like they'll bring up the Matrix and the red pilling and all of that.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that's about waking up.
Yeah, yeah. So
very frustrating.
But to tie it back in, storytelling is such a great way of presenting that stuff in a package that because I think we just learn better through allegory.
I totally agree, and I think there's something that keeps it going. Like it keeps it going in our imagination. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were friends, and Tolkien really didn't like Lewis's like Chronicles of Narnia because it was really over the head, on the nose metaphor, and Tolkien was not. It's like I don't really want to write allegory metaphor. I'm making this fantastical world. And yet you get so much of just Tolkien's experience and personality and values saturating those pages. Mm-hmm. They just come out of him.
Absolutely.
Or at least his self here. I don't know what he was like in his day-to-day. And I see what you're doing as doing that for other folks as well. Like I'm reading Counts, and I see these aspects that you're talking about just in a very natural way, and it's enjoyable.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that book, the title even is like sort of the theme of that book is like make yourself count. Try to make it count for something, right? So it's kind of a double entendre because he does rebrand himself a count when he comes back for his comeuppance and whatnot. But
right.
But the arc in that story is about this guy realizing that like I'm just becoming part of the problem if I'm just out for revenge, and like there's this other movement that I could be helping that would actually stop, prevent another me from happening, sort of thing. And so, yeah, I my hope is that people will read my stuff and leave it feeling more optimistic or a little bit more hopeful than they were when they went in. And, this book very much is about like revolution and overthrowing like, a kind of a fascistic power. So
yeah, well, and so in this moment, a lot of things feel very personal. Mm-hmm. I hear like Wilson Fisk, like it's just business in my mind for a lot of the things happening, but the effects are deeply personal.
Right.
And it's easy to be like, well, I'm gonna hurts the people who hurt me. That's an understandable feeling, but it's a hard way to live.
Yeah.
And it's very isolating, very lonely way to live.
Well, and how long before you just become someone who hurts people?
Exactly.
You know? I mean, that's kind of the trajectory, right?
It's part of why that story still gets adaptations,
Yeah.
right? Like the Count of Monte Cristo just says it continues to preach.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much more I want to talk about. Like I'm really enjoying this very, very much. But I want to open it up to the room for any questions that people have. Steve, would you mind getting a handy dandy microphone or someone passing it around? Travis, thank you. Oh, okay. So any questions in the room? Okay, Dan Scarrett has a question.
Can you talk about some of the influences on your work, such as the creator of Mouse and other people who are considered the greats in the industry?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Gosh, where to start, right? There's so many, I have a lot of artistic influences just from people's work that I've enjoyed. And, it's kind of, sometimes you see art and you're just like, I don't know what it is about that thing, but I know I love it. And I'm going to try my best to sort of learn that technique and emulate it. And I was telling Giuseppe earlier that I used to breakdance. Like I came up as a breakdancer. And in the hip hop culture, if you copy what somebody does, you're a biter. And that's bad, right? Don't do that. But in art, it's very much encouraged, right? Like you should study the masters. You should copy their work and see how they're, So that's something I'm always kind of struggling with influences is like not emulating them, but just sort of trying to absorb what they've done. Yeah, there are a lot of comic book writers and artists that I'm a big fan of. One guy in particular named Alex Ross does these really lifelike paintings of superheroes. And he actually has a really great graphic novel called Kingdom Come, which is about like Superman returning after a long hiatus because he felt like people wanted the flashier superheroes that were more violent and whatnot. And Alex Ross's own father he was a preacher in real life, and he's a character in that book, sort of like going through, which is it the Book of Revelations that they kind of have an analogous sort of track
I believe
with?
so, but I only read the first issue about 25 years ago.
You should. I think you'd like it. It's great.
I probably would.
Yeah. But that Alex Ross was a huge influence on me because as a kid, I always liked to try to draw characters and make them look more real. Like if I was going to draw like Mighty Mouse, I'd draw a real mouse or like, with a cape on. So seeing Alex Ross's work, it wasn't a comic book drawing. It was like a real painting of a real looking guy as Superman. And I was just like, you can do that? Like I didn't,
Yeah.
So that he's been a huge influence on me just in terms of like the believability and the realism and kind of, the way I draw still has very much like kind of a comic booky edge to it, but it's sort of filtered through a more realistic lens than a lot of other more cartoony artists do. So that'd probably be, I think, my biggest influence there. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
All right, let's get Nick and then Wendy.
Hi,
Oh.
sorry. So my son is on the spectrum, and his first reading ever was graphic novels, and I'm on the spectrum. And that's how we were able to communicate with each other, and he was able to write his feelings or his everyday things in his own comic books. Is there something that you would say to like give hope to the youth or the younger generation in this type of everyday, I wouldn't say it's dying type of literature, but I'm just curious.
Thank you for the question. I think the thing I love about comics, I grew up very, very poor, right? And drawing is free, and especially if he's using it as a way to kind of communicate his feelings and stuff, that's phenomenal. And I think have him keep doing that as long as it's bringing him joy, right? Because I think that it's my favorite way of communicating personally, and I think that like there's a lot of merit to it, and I think comics, regardless of what happens in publishing or the market or anything like that, it's always going to be here because we've always drawn through pictures as a human race, right? So yeah, and it's one of those things I think that is going to be carried on just the way that, like, you know, records are coming back and cassette tapes and things like that. So yeah, and like we've been talking about, it's a great way to kind of communicate ideas and stories. So I think anybody who is interested in it, the beauty of it is that, like, you just need a pencil and some paper, you know.
Right. Agnes Garbowska has a really wonderful YouTube channel and newsletter, and writes from the perspective of a creator about our age who has ADHD and is on the spectrum as well. She also has tips for people who are starting off, you know, and I check that out too.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah. Okay, Wendy and then Jan.
Okay, so I have sort of a twofold question. I'm a creative writing master's major, cool. And I am about to publish for young adults. And yes, my stories will be banned in red states because I believe in telling kids the truth. I'm sort of wondering, like, one, how does AI affect your business?
Oh boy.
And what did you, because I notice, you know, I'm wondering, will kids get bored of it and they'll just rubber band back to reading? Like, will that happen? Please?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Was that the whole?
Yeah, and actually I wanted to ask you about publishing, but go ahead.
Oh, well, go ahead and we can stack them all.
What did you look for when you were looking for publishing?
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'll start with that one first because with Count, it was a very strategic move to, as a newer writer / artist. You know, I had been established in the industry as an artist, but it's harder to get your foot in the door as a writer. And frankly, you know, with my ethnicity, my name, like, this is actually a real conversation I had with an editor from DC Comics recently, was that, like, I was like, there's nobody at the table with a name like mine, looks like me. Like, so, you know, I'm operating at a bit of a disadvantage here. And so I knew that I was going to have to try to find a way in that would kind of be a little bit easier to swallow for them. So doing a story based on the Count of Monte Cristo, but my version of it, was a very calculated effort because I knew that they would go, okay, we know this story. So there's a certain amount of comfort they'd have in reading a pitch about something that's like a known quantity, especially now when everything's a sequel or a reboot or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that was how I got in, was just kind of trying to find a lane that I felt was going to be, you know, have fewer roadblocks to it. But it really is, you know, one of my mentors in the industry has likened breaking into publishing to breaking out of jail. Like, he's like, as soon as you find a way to do it, they're going to, like, fix it so that doesn't happen anymore, right. You know? So yeah, I think you just, as far as that goes, you kind of follow who's doing similar stuff to what you're doing, and then that's who you look at for connections in terms of, like, contacts at, you know, so pitching and stuff like that.
Watchmen and Black Hole, those are my
yeah. Yeah, well, you know, and that kind of stuff is you know, I think kind of evergreen. So yeah, really the high concept is what they like. If you can say, you know, like Half-Blood, for example, I kind of pitched it as, like, it's like The Last Samurai meets 30 Days of Night. And those are two movies that they go, oh, I know what those are. And then they just kind of, they can start to see it in their head. Even if it's not what you're giving them, it gives them something to grab onto. So anytime you can have an elevator pitch like that is good.
Well, when I Google you, I see you increasingly gaining this reputation as a genre mixer.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's you're becoming known for that.
Yeah, I really like to give people that sort of easy access point, you know, because it's, you know, you can wax poetic about this, like, world you're building, and, you know, like in Count, I'm like, well, you know, it's actually a world based kind of around, like, the polarity of, like, metals in the earth, and that's why islands float, because they have a reverse polarity to the ground beneath them, and the, you know, right? So you got to find a way to kind of grab them with that 10-second thing, you know? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. As
So
far as your
AI,
yeah.
are you threatened by AI at all?
So in Half-Blood, the character is he creates a moniker for himself, the Black Demon, right? And he becomes so known by who he is and what he does that he's undeniable. Like, because he was facing these obstacles of like nobody wanted him in their retainership as a samurai because of how he looked, but he made himself so fierce and so well known that like they couldn't deny his abilities, right? That's kind of what I've tried to do with my career, and I feel like for me that applies to the AI thing as well. Like, you can ask AI to make, a clown on a bike slicing a pizza, and it'll do it, right? But I'm not. I try to look at it like I'm not making anything that AI could replicate, because this is all stuff that comes out of me and is very personal to me. I do think it's a problem, and I do think that corporate entities are going to use it to try to replace human labor like they do with everything, right? And I'm very much into sustainability and low environmental impact type of stuff, and so that's a big concern of mine as well with AI. I do think it's a bubble that is about to burst because they haven't proven any utility to it. I mean, how many times, a very low form of AI is like predictive text on your phone, right? How many times do you try to type shirt and it says short and you're like, that's not what I was, like that's kind of like AI in a nutshell, right? Like, it can't do a whole lot. Like, yeah. So I think its utility or lack of utility is really gonna. We're already starting to see it. I mean, all these companies are promising all this stuff and like they can't really do any of it, and it's poisoning communities where they have their servers, and so it's creating more problems than it's solving. And I think it's really just one of those things that corporate America and all these investors were told this is the next big thing, and they dumped a bunch of money into it, and it's going to burst. And
It's the board.
All right.
Yeah.
So we're considerably over time, but I did make a promise with Jan. So real quick, because we're a group that takes our coffee and cookies after the service very seriously.
Very seriously.
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you for being here. I recently went to Crow's Shadow Institute, and I was wondering if there's a chance that we could come and see your studio or see what it's like to have a work in progress.
Well, my studio's in my house, so I don't know that it could really facilitate like a group, but we could definitely look into doing like a sort of virtual thing. Maybe that would be really cool. I'd be very open to that. And yeah, thank you all for having me and for your time, and especially if we've gone over. I didn't really know what the window was, so
It's okay. That's my responsibility.
No worries, man.
All right. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's okay. All right.